It was his first combat mission. He had never fired his machine guns at a real enemy. The commanders knew well, rookies rarely survived their first encounter with veteran Japanese pilots. His squadron mates saw it as a death sentence, but they were all wrong. First Lieutenant James Swett didn't just survive. He intercepted a massive formation of about 150 Japanese aircraft heading to attack Allied forces and managed to shoot down 7 enemy planes in a single combat flight. On his debut mission, James Swett became a flying ace. And before I tell you this story, please subscribe to the channel and leave your like so we can hit the goal of 1,000 likes on this video. Comment where you're watching from, and if you or someone in your family has served in the armed forces. Now yes, let's get to what really matters. The 7th of April, 1943, 12:15 p.m. sky over Iron Bottom Sound, Solomon Islands. The South Pacific sun beat mercilessly on the F-4F Wildcat's cockpit when First Lieutenant James Swett, only 22 years old, adjusted his flight goggles and felt sweat run down his neck. Around him, 3 other Wildcats from the division maintained tight formation, Pratt and Whitney engines roaring in unison as they gained altitude over the turquoise-green waters separating Guadalcanal from Tulagi. The radio crackled with the tense voice of the controller at Henderson Field. "Bandits incoming. Large formation. Repeat, large formation." Swett squinted against the blinding glare of the sun and then saw a dark spot on the northern horizon, growing like a swarm of locusts. It wasn't a cloud. It was Japanese bombers. Many bombers. His heart raced, but his hands remained steady on the controls. This was his first real combat. All the months of training in San Diego, all the simulations, all the nightly briefings on aerial tactics, everything converged to this moment. The veterans at Guadalcanal had laughed at him the night before at the officers' club. Rookie, they called him, kid. A broken-nosed pilot who already had 4 confirmations had condescendingly patted his shoulder. Stay alive long enough to tell the tale, boy. Now, as that enemy formation materialized with frightening clarity, he could make out the characteristic silhouettes of the ICD-3A Val Swett, felt something beyond fear. It was hunger. A hunger to prove that all those cynical smiles were wrong. He pressed the radio button. "Division, follow me. We're going straight at them." His voice came out calm, almost casual. But inside the cramped cockpit, his entire body was tense as a compressed spring. The Japanese formation stretched like a deadly swarm later. Intelligence would estimate 150 aircraft, Val bombers escorted by 0 fighters, all on a coordinated mission to devastate American positions at Guadalcanal. It was Operation I-Go, the major Japanese air offensive, designed to regain the initiative in the South Pacific. And there, climbing to intercept them, were 4 Wildcats, 4 against 150. The odds were obscene, but Swett wasn't thinking about odds. He was thinking about attack angles, convergence speeds, firing distances. His training instructor had hammered into his head. 1 second of hesitation means death. Don't think, react. He pushed the stick forward, diving at terminal velocity toward the enemy formation. Wind howled through the cockpit slits. The altimeter spun backward in a dizzying spiral. 7,000 feet, 6,000, 5,000. The distance between him and the bombers decreased at a terrible speed. He could now see the details, the red markings on the wings, the open bomb bays, even the silhouette of a rear gunner moving in one of the defensive positions. His thumb found the firing button on the stick. 4 50 caliber machine guns loaded and ready. 2,400 rounds per minute, combined when all fire together. He had to get close, very close. Ammunition was limited, and every bullet counted. 1,500 feet, 1,000 feet. He could see the gleam of sun on the Japanese engine cowlings, could see the propellers spinning. Then, at 800 feet, he squeezed the trigger. The entire Wildcat shook with the recoil of the machine guns. Red tracers sliced through the air, converging on a single deadly point. The first Val exploded almost instantly, an orange and black fireball that bloomed like a malevolent flower against the blue sky. Swett had no time to celebrate. He adjusted his aim, compensating for relative speed, and drove bursts into the second bomber. Black smoke poured from the engine. The right wing shattered. The aircraft began to spin uncontrollably, falling in a death spiral toward the ocean below. Third target. Swett wasn't even thinking consciously anymore. His body acted on trained muscle memory. Aim, adjust, fire. Another valve broke in half in midair, the fuselage fragmenting under the concentrated impact of 50 caliber bullets. 3 kills in less than 45 seconds. Then all hell broke loose. Japanese anti-aircraft fire, both from the bombers and from the escort fighters now reacting, turned the sky around him into a deadly maze of tracers and explosions. Something hit the Wildcat hard, a sharp metallic sound like a cracked bell. The windscreen in front of him shattered into a spiderweb of fissures. Plexiglass fragments flew into the cockpit. He felt something hot and wet run down his face, blood or fuel, he didn't know. The engine began to choke, the engine note changing from a steady roar to an irregular and sinister rhythm. Hot oil sprayed through a ruptured seal, covering what remained of his windscreen with a dark film. His division had scattered. The other 3 Wildcats were fighting their own battles somewhere in that 3-dimensional chaos. Swett was alone now, alone against dozens of enemy bombers and fighters. The sensible thing would have been to disengage, dive away, preserve the aircraft, and go home. But James Swett was 22 years old, had just shot down 3 enemy aircraft in his first combat, and had something to prove not just to the mocking veterans, but to himself. He saw another group of Vals breaking away from the main formation, probably trying to escape the slaughter. He pushed the throttle to the limit, ignoring the sharp protests of the damaged engine, and pursued. The Wildcat, sturdy and reliable despite the damage, responded. He came from below and behind the classic dead zone, where Japanese gunners had limited firing angle. 100 yards, 50, so close, he could see the rivets on the enemy fuselage. He squeezed the trigger and held it down. The machine guns spat fire. The 4th valve practically disintegrated under the weight of fire, pieces of wing and fuselage separating in surreal slow motion. There were no parachutes. 5th target. This pilot was more skilled. He maneuvered violently, trying to throw Swett out of position. But Swett had been the best gunnery student in his training class. He anticipated the turn, led the target perfectly, and a 3-second burst cut through the bomber's cockpit. The aircraft dove at an impossible angle, out of control. 5 confirmed. He was officially an ace. 5 victories made any pilot an ace, and he had achieved it in less than 10 minutes of combat. But he wasn't finished. His ammunition was low. He could tell by the decreased rate of fire, by the way the machine guns now fired in stuttering bursts instead of the steady roar. He had maybe 10 seconds of continuous fire remaining. Had to make every bullet count. 2 more Vals ahead, flying in tight formation. Swett lined up both in his sights, an impossible shot, requiring surgical precision. He took a deep breath, let instinct guide his hands, and squeezed the trigger. The leader of the pair exploded first. Then, miraculously, the flaming wreckage struck his wingman, and both aircraft fell intertwined in a flaming death spiral. 6, 7. 7 enemy aircraft destroyed, in a single flight, in 15 minutes of absolutely insane combat. But the price was taking its toll. The Wildcat's engine was dying. Thick black smoke now filled the cockpit, making his eyes burn. Oil temperature was in the red zone. He could feel the aircraft losing power, the propeller slowing. The altimeter showed 3,000 feet and falling. He had to land. Immediately. Guadalcanal was too far. He'd never make it with that failing engine. But Tulagi was right there, the small island with its protected bay where American PT boats operated. He turned toward it, every second a gamble against gravity and failing mechanics. At 1,000 feet, the engine finally quit completely. Just the sound of wind now, and the sinister whistle of air passing over damaged control surfaces. He glided as best he could, but the Wildcat wasn't designed to fly like a glider. It was sinking fast. 500 feet. 300. He could see individual waves now, the texture of the water. Local fishermen in an outrigger canoe looked up, mouths open. Swett braced for impact. 100 feet. 50. He pulled the nose up at the last possible second, bleeding off speed, trying to make the Wildcat touch the water as gently as possible. It wasn't gentle. The impact was brutal, like hitting concrete at 120 miles per hour. His head bounced off the panel, His teeth clashed with enough force to make stars explode in his vision. The Wildcat bounced once, then dove, the green Pacific water swallowing the aircraft's nose. It was sinking. The cockpit was flooding. Cold, salty water engulfed his legs, his waist, his chest. He fought with the seatbelt, with fingers that suddenly seemed thick and useless. The belt released. He pushed himself out of the cockpit as the Wildcat slid beneath the waves. He surfaced, spitting salt water, lungs burning. A PT boat was on its way, its bow cutting through the waves. Hands pulled him out of the water. Voices shouted questions. He lay on the wet deck, gasping, every muscle trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. Someone offered him a cigarette. He accepted with shaking hands and inhaled deeply, letting the nicotine calm his shattered nerves. "How many did you get, Lieutenant?" asked a young sailor, no older than 18. Swett had to think. The events of the last 15 minutes were already beginning to blur in his mind a sequence of fragmented images and visceral sensations. 7, he finally said, his voice hoarse from smoke and exertion. "I got 7 of them." The sailor whistled low. Other crew members gathered around. The news was spreading over the radio. The rookie, the 22-year-old kid the veterans had mocked, had just shot down 7 Japanese bombers in his first combat, alone, with a damaged aircraft, using nothing but raw skill, insane courage, and the absolute refusal to give up. That night, back at Guadalcanal, the officers' club was quieter than normal when Swett entered. He was still wearing his flight suit stained with oil and blood, an improvised bandage on his forehead where a plexiglass fragment had cut. The broken-nosed pilot, the same one who had called Swett Kid, stood up slowly. For a long moment, the two men just looked at each other across the smoky room. Then the veteran raised his glass. "To James Swett," he said, his voice carrying a respect that wasn't there before, "who shot down more Japs in one day than most of us shoot down in a month." The room exploded in applause and shouts. Glasses slammed on tables. Men who had flown hundreds of hours of combat, who had seen comrades die, who carried their own scars and traumas, all of them were standing now, saluting the rookie who had done the impossible. Swett just nodded, uncomfortable with the attention, and ordered a beer. He wasn't the type to seek glory. He had done his job. That was it. But in the bureaucratic machinery of war, gears were already turning. Reports were being written. Witnesses were being interviewed. Swett's action had been simply too extraordinary to go unnoticed. On the 12th of October 1943, 6 months after that memorable day over Iron Bottom Sound, First Lieutenant James Swett stood at attention, while Major General Ralph J. Mitchell hung the Medal of Honor around his neck, the highest military decoration the United States can award. The citation spoke of conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, and utter disregard for personal danger. Formal and official words that barely captured the raw and bloody reality of those 15 minutes over the Solomon Islands. Words that couldn't convey the smell of cordite and blood, the taste of fear at the back of the throat, the way time seems to simultaneously drag and race during combat. Words that couldn't describe what it really means to be 22 years old and face death 100 times in a quarter of an hour and win. But for those who were there, for those who saw, words weren't necessary. They knew. Swett would continue flying. 102 more combat missions before the end of the war. 15 confirmed aerial victories in total, plus 1 shared half victory. He survived the war, something many of his contemporaries didn't manage. He married, had children, continued serving his country through decades of Cold War and minor conflicts. He rose through the ranks, from lieutenant to captain, from major to colonel. In 1970, he retired after a distinguished career of almost 3 decades of military service. But on some level, a part of him always remained in that cockpit over the South Pacific, 22 years old, facing impossibilities, proving to himself and everyone else that courage and skill could triumph over overwhelming numbers. There was a peculiar irony in the fact that the airport in Trinity Center, California, would bear his name. Swett, who had been forced to land in the water on that fateful day, would be forever associated with a land airstrip. But perhaps it was appropriate. War is full of ironies and contradictions. Heroes who look like ordinary people, young men who perform acts of unimaginable valor, Moments of absolute terror that later become polished legends told in military academies and memorials. The truth about James Swett, the truth that medal citations and official histories rarely capture, is simpler and deeper than any heroic narrative. He was just a young man doing his job under extraordinary circumstances. He was afraid any sensible person would be, but he didn't let fear paralyze him. He channeled it into action, into focus, into precise execution of everything he had learned. And when his limits were tested, when everything seemed impossible, he discovered he had more to give than he imagined. That's the real lesson of the 7th of April 1943. Not that one man can shoot down 7 aircraft, though that's impressive. Not that youth and determination can overcome experience, though sometimes they can. The real lesson is about the human capacity to function under unimaginable pressure, to find reserves of courage and competence we didn't know we possessed, to refuse to give up, even when every rational factor says we should. James Swett proved something that day that resonates far beyond 1943, beyond World War II, beyond even the military context. He proved that when we're tested, when the crucial moment comes, we're capable of more than we imagine. That excellence under pressure isn't about absence of fear, but about action despite fear. That sometimes the difference between failure and extraordinary success is simply the refusal to accept defeat. The veterans who laughed at him weren't being cruel, not really. They had seen too many rookies arrive full of confidence, only to freeze or panic in their first real combat. They were trying to protect him, in their twisted way, from unrealistic expectations. What they couldn't know is that James Swett wasn't an ordinary rookie. He had that rare quality that separates good pilots from legendary ones. The ability to remain cool when everything's on fire, to think clearly when chaos reigns, to execute perfectly when imperfect execution means death. That can't be taught, not really. It can be refined through training, but it has to be there to begin with. And Swett had it. When he died on the 18th of January 2009, at 88 years old, the world lost one of the last great aviation aces of World War II. News of his death was relatively quiet, few headlines, some respectful obituaries in military newspapers. The man who once ruled the skies over the Pacific died quietly in a hospital bed, surrounded by family, in the way most of us hope to depart. But those who knew his story, those who studied his impossible mission on that April day in 1943, felt the loss deeply. Because people like James Swett remind us of what human beings are capable of when we're at our best. They set standards that seem impossible until someone achieves them. They show that heroism isn't just about muscles or weapons, but about character, skill, and the refusal to give up. At the United States Naval Academy, at the Naval Aviation School, in military classrooms around the world, the story of James Swett is still told. Young pilots still study his tactics, his decision to dive straight into an overwhelming formation, his coolness under fire, his determination to keep fighting even with his aircraft falling apart around him. Instructors still use his mission as a case study in effective air combat. And still, always, there are skeptics, those who hear the story and shake their heads. 7 aircraft? In 15 minutes? In his first combat? It seems impossible. It seems like the kind of story that grows in the retelling, where 3 victories become 5, 5 become 7. But the records are clear. Multiple witnesses, official reports, confirmed wreckage. James Swett really did what the legends say he did. The impossible happened. Maybe that's what makes his story so powerful. In a world where so much seems predetermined, where the odds often seem insurmountable, where cynicism says heroic effort doesn't matter anymore, the story of James Swett is a vibrant and indisputable contradiction. He proves that individuals still matter, that skill and courage can still change the course of events, that even when you're young, inexperienced, and everyone doubts you, you can achieve something extraordinary. The Japanese laughed at the 22-year-old. Or maybe that's poetic license, it's unlikely. Japanese pilots knew anything about the American rookie who was climbing to intercept them, but the American veterans laughed, underestimated, called him a kid, and then he went out and, in 15 minutes of pure hell in the sky, silenced all the laughter forever. So when the battle ended, when the smoke cleared, when the final count was made, there was no more laughter. only respect, only amazement, only the recognition that they had witnessed something extraordinary, the birth of a legend, executed in the sunny Pacific sky by a young man who refused to accept limitations. James Swett taught a lesson that day that transcends war, transcends even aviation. He taught that underestimating someone based on age or experience is a mistake. That potential is often hidden until extreme circumstances reveal it. That greatness can come from unexpected places and unlikely people. And perhaps most importantly, he taught that when you're tested, when everything's at stake, when failure means not just your own death, but potentially the death of hundreds of comrades depending on you, you discover who you really are. You discover if the training held, if the courage is real or just bravado, if you have what it takes to join the ranks of those rare individuals who change the course of history with their actions. James Swett discovered he did, and the world never forgot. 66 years later, in 2009, when the old colonel finally took off his wings for the last time, he had lived a full and rich life. But if you asked him about his defining moment, about the day that made him who he was, he would invariably return to the 7th of April 1943, to those 15 minutes over Iron Bottom Sound, to the roar of engines and the crackle of machine guns, to the smell of cordite and the taste of fear, to that crystalline moment when everything clicked and he became, for a brief and brilliant instant, perfect at what he did. That's James Swett's legacy. Not just the 7 victories, though those are impressive. Not just the Medal of Honor, though that's the greatest tribute a nation can give. His true legacy is proof that the exceptional is possible, that the limits we accept are often self-imposed, that when pressed, when challenged, when placed in the position where retreat isn't an option, human beings are capable of achievements that defy belief. The veterans stopped laughing. The world took notice. And a 22-year-old pilot, flying a damaged aircraft over hostile waters, etched his name in the annals of military history with 15 minutes of pure excellence under fire. That's the story of James Swett. That's the story of the day the impossible became real. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like and comment where you're watching us from. I want to know how far our content is reaching. And also, subscribe to our channel so you have access to incredible stories for free. Big hug and see you in the next video.